We were pursued by unknown people, and to find out who they were, we reached out to the FBI, but due to an information leak, we were constantly found. And then, I'm Mason, 25 now, but it all started way back when I was just a kid. My childhood wasn't exactly sunshine and rainbows. If anything, it was the opposite. My parents? Let's just say they didn't want me, and they made sure I knew that every single day. It wasn't like they screamed it in my face, but their cold, distant stares, the way they dismiss me or belittle me. Hell, even ignoring me was worse. Sometimes I think hatred might be too weak a word for what I felt coming from them. My dad, he wasn't around much. When he was, he made it clear I was just an inconvenience. He was always complaining about how I cost too much, how I ate too much, and how I never did enough to help around the house, even though I did everything a kid my age could. My mom? She just existed. I don't think she ever hugged me past the age of 5, and if she did, it was probably because someone else was watching. She was cold, but unlike Dad, her indifference hurt more than his anger. It was like I didn't even exist to her most days. So yeah, growing up in that house was brutal. I started avoiding home as much as I could, finding any excuse to be away. That's how I met Ethan and Logan. We were in 4th grade, and somehow, even at that age, we were the outcasts. Ethan was small for his age, constantly getting picked on, and Logan? He just didn't care. He had this laid-back vibe that somehow drew both Ethan and me in. Maybe it was because we didn't have much going on in the way of family, or maybe we were just 3 misfits destined to find each other, but whatever it was, we clicked. From day one, we were inseparable. Logan's family wasn't much better than mine. His dad had split, and his mom worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Ethan, well, his parents were a little overbearing, but at least they cared about him. We'd spend hours at Logan's place because his mom was never home, and it was like we had this freedom we couldn't find anywhere else. It was just the 3 of us against the world, or at least that's how it felt. As we got older, things got tougher. Middle school was rough. By then, I'd learned not to let anyone too close. I guess you could say I had trust issues, courtesy of my parents. But Ethan and Logan, they were different. We had this unspoken bond. We understood each other's struggles in a way no one else did, and we didn't need to talk about it all the time. That's when the idea came to us. Chocolates. Yeah, I know it sounds random, but hear me out. We were 13, sitting around at Logan's, wondering how the hell we were going to make any kind of life for ourselves if we didn't start doing something about it. None of us had any money, obviously, in college. That felt like a distant dream, but we all knew we wanted something better. We needed a way to make money, and for whatever reason, we settled on selling chocolate. Logan's mom worked at this big candy factory just outside of town, and she would sometimes bring home rejected batches of chocolate bars. You know, the ones with packaging mistakes or minor defects that they couldn't sell. Logan had been snacking on them for years, and one day, he mentioned how people at school were always asking for a piece. And that's when it hit us. What if we started selling them? It started small, just a few bars here and there, but pretty soon, we realized we could make a decent amount of cash. We started packaging them up all nice and neat, making them look like premium treats, and selling them for more than they were worth. It wasn't like we were running a black market or anything, but we had something going, enough to make some spending money, and enough to make us think maybe, just maybe, we could save up for college one day. By the time high school rolled around, we had a whole operation. We weren't just selling chocolate anymore. We were trading in trinkets, little knickknacks we'd find or make, things like bracelets, keychains, anything we thought people would want. We learned a lot about how to hustle, how to market ourselves, and how to keep everything under wraps. It was our little secret, and no one suspected a thing. The money wasn't amazing, but it was enough. It was enough to give us hope, to make us think that maybe we wouldn't be stuck in this dead-end town forever. And we were saving it all. Every penny went into this jar we kept hidden in Logan's room. We called it our college fund. And though it seemed like a joke at first, after a while, it didn't feel so far-fetched. We all had different dreams, different paths we wanted to take. Ethan wanted to study computer science. He was always the brainy one, the guy who could take apart a computer and put it back together like it was a toy. Logan? He was into art, sketching, and designing things, but he wasn't the artsy-fartsy type. He wanted to get into graphic design, create things that people would actually use. As for me, I didn't know. I guess I just wanted to get out, to find a way to escape the life I'd been dealt. I figured I'd land on something eventually. Somehow, we all ended up getting into the same university. It felt like a miracle, but maybe it was just the result of all those years of hustling and working our asses off. Ethan went for computer science, Logan got into the graphic design program, and I ended up in business school. It made sense, I guess. I'd always been the one keeping track of our little side hustle, making sure we weren't spending too much, figuring out how to maximize our profits. Maybe I had a knack for it, but honestly, I was just happy we were still together. College was a whole new world. We weren't rich by any means, but we had enough saved up to get by, at least for a while. And we didn't stop hustling. We got part-time jobs. Ethan worked at the campus tech center fixing computers, Logan freelanced as a designer, and I picked up a job at a local coffee shop. It wasn't glamorous, but we were making it work. We had a plan, and for the first time in our lives, it felt like things were looking up. But then things started to shift. Not in a big, dramatic way, but in little ways that added up over time. We were still tight, but the stress of college, of trying to keep up with classes and work, started to weigh on us. We had this dream of graduating debt-free, of making something of ourselves, but reality had other plans. And then, out of nowhere, it all came crashing down. One night, we were hanging out at Logan's apartment, like we always did, talking about the future. We had this tradition where we'd go over our savings, count every dollar and cent, and make plans for how we'd use it once we graduated. But that night, something was off. Logan was acting weird, fidgety, like he had something on his mind. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, I should have known. Logan dropped the bomb on us that he'd been keeping a secret for months. He had spent almost half of our college fund, our hard-earned money, on some investment that had gone belly up. It's crazy to think how quickly everything can fall apart. One second, you're planning for the future with the people you trust the most, and the next, you're questioning everything. That night at Logan's apartment, the night he dropped that bomb on us, it was like the ground had been pulled out from under me. So here's the thing. Logan didn't just lose some of our savings. He lost half of it. And this wasn't just a small-time screw-up. He had gone behind our backs for months, gambling on some ridiculous investment scheme that promised big returns. He'd gotten involved with some sketchy online group that convinced him he could double, even triple, our money. It wasn't just the loss that stung. It was the betrayal. How could he keep something like that from us? Ethan sat there in shock, his face pale. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how the hell we were going to recover from this. He was the numbers guy, the one who always had a backup plan. But this time, there was no quick fix. No way to just patch things up and move on. I felt this wave of anger hit me, and before I could even stop myself, I was on my feet, yelling at Logan. How could you do this to us? I shouted. We've been saving for years. Do you have any idea what you've done? Logan didn't even look me in the eye. He just sat there, staring at the floor, his hands gripping the edges of his chair like he was holding on for dear life. I'm sorry, he mumbled. I thought it was going to work out. I really did. I wanted to believe him, but the damage was done. Half of our future, gone. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I looked at Ethan, hoping he'd say something to make sense of it all, but he was just as lost as I was. For days after that, things were tense. We still saw each other, but it wasn't the same. There was this weird distance between us, like we didn't know how to act around each other anymore. Logan kept apologizing, trying to make up for it, but the trust was broken. And once that's gone, it's hard to get it back. I was furious, not just at Logan, but at myself too. How had I let this happen? How did I not see the signs that something was wrong? I started replaying every interaction, every moment leading up to that night, wondering if there had been clues that I'd missed. But nothing added up. It wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the fact that someone I considered my brother had lied to me. Ethan tried to be the peacemaker. He was always the calm one, the guy who could keep a level head even when everything was falling apart. But even he couldn't hide the frustration. Look, he said one day when we were sitting at the coffee shop where I worked, what's done is done. We can't go back, but we've got to figure out what to do now. I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier. How were we supposed to move forward when we'd lost half of what we'd worked so hard for? And what was Logan going to do to make it right? A few weeks later, things took another unexpected turn. Logan, in his desperation to fix things, started working crazy hours, taking on more freelance gigs than he could handle. He was trying to pay us back, and while I appreciated the effort, it didn't change the fact that he'd screwed up. But then something strange happened. Logan started getting these calls, random numbers, unknown callers who wouldn't leave messages. At first, he brushed it off, thinking it was just spam or telemarketers. But the calls kept coming, day after day, at all hours of the night. It was starting to freak him out. One night, we were all hanging out at Logan's place again, trying to get back to some kind of normal. Ethan and I were talking about one of his classes when Logan's phone rang again. He looked at the screen, sighed, and hit ignore. "Who keeps calling you?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. Logan hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know," he said. "It's been happening for weeks. It's probably nothing." But something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. "You sure?" I asked, leaning forward. "Because this doesn't sound like nothing." Logan shrugged. "I don't know, man. Maybe it's something to do with that investment thing. I've been getting all these weird emails too. People saying I owe them money, but I haven't responded. I thought it was just a scam." Now my heart was pounding. "What do you mean, people saying you owe them money?" Logan rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "I didn't think it was real, okay? When the investment went south, I started getting these messages, people saying I owed them, threatening me if I didn't pay back what I lost. But I thought it was just some scare tactic. Like, they couldn't actually come after me, right?" Ethan and I exchanged a look. This was way bigger than we thought. Logan hadn't just lost money. He'd gotten mixed up in something much worse. "Logan," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm, "you need to take this seriously. If these people are real, you could be in danger." But Logan waved it off. "It's just a scam. They're trying to scare me into giving them more money. I'm not falling for it." The next few days were a blur. Logan kept getting the calls, the emails. He stopped answering them, but the messages were getting more aggressive. The threats were becoming more specific, mentions of where he lived, the places he frequented. I started to get seriously worried. Then one night, something happened that I'll never forget. It was around 2 a.m., and I was jolted awake by my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was Ethan. "Mason, you need to get to Logan's place right now," he said, his voice shaky. "What? Why? What happened?" I asked, already pulling on my jeans and grabbing my keys. "I don't know all the details, but someone broke into his apartment. He's okay, but it's bad." I sped over to Logan's place as fast as I could. When I got there, the front door was wide open, the lock busted. Inside, it was chaos. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out, and papers were scattered everywhere. Logan was sitting on the couch, his face pale, a blanket draped over his shoulders. Ethan was next to him, trying to calm him down. "What the hell happened?" I asked, my heart racing. "They were looking for something," Logan whispered, his voice barely audible. "They trashed the place, but they didn't take anything. They just kept saying they wanted the money." I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't some scam. These people were real, and they weren't messing around. That night changed everything. We weren't just three friends trying to make it through college anymore. We were caught up in something dangerous, something that none of us were prepared for. Logan was terrified, and honestly, so was I. We had no idea who these people were, or how far they were willing to go. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Logan started getting followed. Strange cars parked outside his apartment, shadowy figures watching him from a distance. We couldn't go to the police. Logan was too scared that if he did, things would only escalate. We needed a plan, and fast. Ethan, always the logical one, started doing research, trying to figure out who these people were. He found out that the online group Logan had gotten involved with was part of a larger network of scammers who preyed on desperate people looking to make quick money. And once they had you hooked, they didn't let go easily. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Our lives had been turned upside down, and we were all in danger. After that night, things took a dark turn for all of us. It wasn't just about Logan anymore. Ethan and I were getting pulled into the mess too. We weren't just dealing with the fallout of losing our savings. We were dealing with the terrifying reality that someone was out there, watching us, waiting for Logan to slip up. For the first few days after the break-in, we didn't know what to do. Logan was on edge, jumping at every little sound, barely sleeping. Ethan and I took turns staying over at his place, not wanting him to be alone. It was like living in a nightmare. We couldn't go to the police. Logan was convinced that would make things worse. And honestly, I wasn't sure he was wrong. These people weren't messing around. Then one day, about a week after the break-in, we got another shock. I was at work when Ethan called me, sounding more panicked than I'd ever heard him. "Mason, you need to get to Logan's place. Asterisk asterisk now asterisk asterisk," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Again?" I asked, my stomach sinking. What happened this time? "They sent a package." That was all I needed to hear. I raced over to Logan's apartment, half expecting to find the place trashed again. When I got there, Ethan and Logan were both standing in the living room, staring at a small, plain cardboard box sitting on the coffee table. There was no return address, nothing to indicate where it had come from, but we all knew who had sent it. "What's inside?" I asked, my throat dry. "We haven't opened it yet," Logan muttered, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm scared too." Ethan, ever the logical one, stepped forward. "We have to know," he said quietly, picking up the box and turning it over in his hands. "If this is from them, it could be a warning. Or worse." My heart pounded as Ethan carefully pulled at the tape sealing the box. Inside was a small envelope and a flash drive. No note, no explanation, just those two things. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, feeling a chill run down my spine. Ethan pulled out the flash drive and turned it over in his hands. "I guess we'll find out," he said grimly. We all gathered around Logan's laptop, the tension so thick I could barely breathe. Ethan plugged in the flash drive, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a single video file popped up on the screen. None of us wanted to be the one to click it, but eventually, Logan steeled himself and hit play. The video was short, just a minute or two, but it was enough to turn my blood to ice. It showed Logan walking down the street, completely unaware, as a man in a hoodie followed him from a distance. The camera zoomed in on Logan's face, then cut to the man following him. And then, it cut to black. "That's from last week," Logan whispered, his voice shaking. "That was the day after the break-in." I felt sick. They weren't just sending threats, they were showing us that they were watching. Closely. The message was clear. Logan wasn't safe, and neither were we. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "What the hell do we do now?" "We need to leave," Ethan said, his voice steady but urgent. "All of us. We can't stay here. Not with them watching like this." He was right, but the thought of leaving everything behind, our classes, our jobs, our lives, was overwhelming. Still, it wasn't like we had much of a choice. We spent the rest of that day packing up whatever we could carry, cramming it into our cars. Logan's apartment was compromised, and none of us felt safe staying in our own places either. So, we decided to lay low at a friend's place, someone outside of our usual circle who wouldn't be connected to us. Our friend, Jack, was a guy we knew from high school. He'd stayed in town after graduation, working odd jobs and renting a small house on the outskirts of the city. We hadn't been super close since then, but Jack was the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. When we explained what was going on, he didn't hesitate to offer us a place to crash. For the next week, we holed up at Jack's place, trying to figure out our next move. Logan was practically a ghost, barely eating, barely talking. The stress was getting to him in a big way, and I didn't blame him. Ethan and I were trying to keep it together, but every day felt like a ticking time bomb. Meanwhile, Ethan kept digging into the group that Logan had gotten involved with. He'd found a few threads online, people talking about similar scams, but none of them seemed to have been targeted as aggressively as Logan. It didn't make sense. Why were they coming after him so hard? Then, one night, Ethan made a breakthrough. He was sitting at Jack's kitchen table, his laptop open, when he suddenly sat up straight, his eyes wide. "Holy shit," he breathed. "What is it?" I asked, leaning over to see what he'd found. Ethan pointed at the screen. "It's not just about the money," he said. Logan's investment wasn't just a scam. It was part of a much bigger operation. I frowned. What do you mean? Ethan clicked on a few links, pulling up articles and message board threads. This group? They're not just after money. They're using people like Logan to launder money. The investments, the transactions, they're all part of some kind of front for a much bigger operation. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, you name it. I felt the blood drain from my face. So, what? Logan got mixed up in some kind of criminal ring? Ethan nodded grimly. Yeah. And the reason they're coming after him so hard? It's because they think he knows something. Something they don't want getting out. We both turned to look at Logan, who was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. He looked completely drained, like he hadn't slept in days. I walked over to him, my mind racing. Logan, I said softly, did you hear what Ethan just said? This isn't just about the money. These people think you know something dangerous. Logan blinked, his eyes glassy. I don't know anything, he whispered. I swear to God, I don't. I believed him. Logan wasn't the type to get involved in anything shady on purpose. But whether he knew it or not, he'd stumbled into something far bigger than any of us could have imagined. And now, we were all paying the price. For the next few days, we were on high alert, constantly watching our backs. Jack's house was out of the way, but we couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching. Every time a car drove by, every time we heard a noise outside, my heart would race. None of us were sleeping well, especially Logan. He was falling apart in front of our eyes, and there was nothing we could do to fix it. Then, one night, everything came to a head. We were sitting in the living room, the tension thick in the air, when we heard a knock at the door. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but then it grew louder, more insistent. Jack froze, his eyes wide. No one knew we were here, or at least, we thought no one did. Ethan motioned for us to be quiet as he crept to the window, peeking through the curtains. His face went pale, and he quickly ducked down, motioning for us to stay back. It's them, he mouthed, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart stopped. What do we do? I whispered back, my hands shaking. Ethan's mind was already racing. He pointed toward the back door. We need to get out. Asterisk asterisk now asterisk asterisk. Without another word, we all scrambled toward the back of the house, grabbing whatever we could carry. As we slipped out into the night, the knocking at the front door turned into pounding, like whoever was out there was ready to break the door down. We ran, not knowing where we were going, not knowing if we were going to make it out alive. Running through the night, the cold air biting at our faces, felt like something out of a bad dream. But this was real, too real. The pounding at Jack's door, the fear coursing through my veins. It was all happening. We weren't just scared kids anymore. We were in serious danger, and the only thing we could do was keep moving. Jack led the way as we bolted out the back door, his flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. Behind us, the sounds of the pounding grew more violent. I could hear splintering wood, and I knew that whoever was at the front door had finally broken through. There was no time to think, no time to plan. We just had to run. We sprinted through the backyard, jumping over the fence into a field that stretched out behind Jack's house. There was nothing but open land for miles. No cover, no buildings, just us and the night sky. It was terrifying. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see shadows chasing after us, but the only thing I could hear was the sound of our feet pounding against the dirt. Ethan was breathing heavily beside me, his face pale in the moonlight. Logan was falling behind, his legs clearly struggling to keep up. I slowed down for him, grabbing his arm and practically dragging him along. Come on, man, I urged, my voice hoarse. We can't stop now. I can't, Logan wheezed, doubling over for a moment. I can't keep going. But we didn't have a choice. I pulled him upright, and we kept moving, pushing through the exhaustion and fear. Jack led us toward a small patch of trees at the far end of the field. It wasn't much, but it was the only cover we had. As we huddled in the shadows of the trees, trying to catch our breath, I finally allowed myself to think. How did we get here? How did things get so out of control? I turned to Logan, who was leaning against a tree, panting heavily. Logan, you need to tell us everything, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What do these people want? Why are they coming after you like this? Logan looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. He didn't answer right away, and I could see the internal battle he was fighting. He was still hiding something, something big. Ethan chimed in, his voice tense. Logan, we can't help you if you don't tell us what's really going on. They won't stop until they get what they want. Logan hesitated for a long moment before finally speaking. His voice was barely above a whisper. It's not just about the money, he admitted, his voice shaking. They think I know something. Something I didn't even realize I was involved in. Ethan and I exchanged a glance. This was what we'd suspected, but hearing Logan confirm it made my stomach turn. I got in too deep, Logan continued, his hands trembling. When I first got involved with that investment group, I didn't realize what it was. They made it sound like some easy, no-risk way to make money. But after a while, they started asking for more information. They wanted details, personal details, about the people I was working with, the accounts I had access to. At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just part of the process. But now I realize I was giving them everything they needed to launder money. And once I started pulling back, they must have thought I was trying to expose them. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. So they think you're some kind of threat to their operation? Logan nodded miserably. Yeah. And now they're hunting me down because they think I know too much. It all started to make sense. The emails, the calls, the break-in. They weren't just trying to scare Logan. They were trying to silence him. And if we didn't find a way to stop them, we were all in serious danger. Ethan, ever the practical one, was already thinking ahead. We need proof, he said, his eyes sharp with determination. If we can get evidence of what they're doing, real evidence, we can take it to the authorities. If we can expose them first, maybe we can turn the tables. Logan shook his head. I don't have anything, he said, his voice filled with despair. They wiped everything. All the emails, the transaction records, it's all gone. But Ethan wasn't deterred. There has to be something, he insisted. No one wipes everything clean. There's always a trail. We just have to find it. The problem was, we didn't have time. We were being hunted, and every second we spent hiding in the trees felt like borrowed time. I was terrified that any moment we'd see headlights or hear footsteps closing in on us. Jack, who had been silent up to this point, suddenly spoke. There's one more thing we could try, he said, his voice low. My cousin works in cybersecurity. He's good, like, really good. He might be able to recover some of the data you lost. But we'll have to get to him first. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only one we had. We had no choice but to trust Jack's cousin and hope that he could help us find something, anything, that could bring these people down. We spent the rest of the night moving carefully through back roads and alleys, avoiding any major highways where we might be spotted. Jack's cousin lived in a small town about an hour away, and we drove in shifts, taking turns behind the wheel, the weight of fear pressing down on us the whole time. When we finally arrived at his cousin's house, it was nearly dawn. The sky was starting to lighten, and the exhaustion was hitting all of us hard. Jack's cousin, Dylan, was already waiting for us. He was a wiry guy in his late 20s, with sharp eyes and a calm, measured way of speaking. He didn't ask too many questions when we explained what we needed, but I could tell he understood the gravity of the situation. I'll do my best, Dylan said, sitting down at his computer and plugging in Logan's laptop. But if they've covered their tracks, it might take a while. The next few hours were agonizing. We sat in Dylan's living room, barely speaking, just waiting for some kind of news. Logan was pacing, his hands shaking, while Ethan and I sat quietly, trying to keep our minds from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dylan called us into the room. I've got something, he said, his voice steady. It's not a lot, but it's a start. He pulled up a series of encrypted files that had been hidden deep in the system, files that Logan hadn't even known existed. Dylan explained that they were likely part of the laundering operation, containing traces of the money transfers and account details that the group had been using. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to prove that Logan had been caught up in something illegal. This is good, Ethan said, his voice filled with cautious hope. We can use this. We can go to the police now. But Logan looked more terrified than ever. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "They'll come after me. After all of us. If they find out we're going to the authorities." "They won't," I said firmly, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're going to do this the right way. We'll go straight to the FBI, and they'll protect us. They'll have to." It was the only option we had. We couldn't keep running forever. The next day, we made the call. Dylan had contacts in the FBI, people he trusted to handle this discreetly. Within hours, we were sitting in a sterile government office, laying everything out for them. The agents listened carefully, their faces grim, but they took us seriously. They promised to protect us, to keep us safe while they launched their investigation into the criminal organization that had targeted Logan. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. We'd done it. We'd taken the first step toward getting out of this nightmare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over yet. There was still a long road ahead, and the people who had come after Logan weren't going to give up easily. As we left the FBI office that afternoon, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me. We were safe for now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from the end. We had uncovered something huge, something dangerous, and there was no telling what kind of fallout was waiting for us. But at least we weren't running anymore. We were fighting back, and that was something. The days after meeting with the FBI were some of the most surreal of my life. For the first time, we weren't looking over our shoulders every minute, wondering if someone was watching. We had the full force of the government behind us now, and the agents made it clear that they were taking this seriously. They gave us burner phones, a safe house, and promised protection. But even with all of that, there was a lingering sense of dread hanging over us. Logan hadn't spoken much since we left the FBI office. He was haunted, constantly fidgeting, barely eating. I couldn't blame him. He was the center of all this. His life had been ripped apart by a mistake, and now, even though we'd finally done the right thing, the consequences still felt like they were looming. The FBI had assured us that they were working to dismantle the criminal network that had targeted Logan, but that wasn't going to happen overnight. We were still in the crosshairs, and until the people behind this were taken down, we couldn't let our guard down. That knowledge gnawed at all of us. A week passed, and though the FBI updated us regularly, there was little news. They had started to make arrests, but the group was more extensive than we had realized, and their reach was far more dangerous. Logan was particularly on edge. He had been jumpy for days, constantly scanning every room we entered like he was expecting someone to break down the door at any moment. It was during one of these FBI check-ins that things took a sharp turn. One night, we were at the safe house, a small, nondescript building in the middle of nowhere. It was late, around midnight, and Ethan, Logan, and I were sitting in the living room, trying to relax with an old movie playing in the background. Jack had left earlier to grab some groceries, so it was just the three of us. That's when the call came in on one of the burner phones. It was an FBI agent, the same one we'd been working with from the start. "Hey, Mason, listen carefully," the agent said, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "We've got a situation. We've picked up some chatter that suggests they've figured out where you are. We're moving you to a new location immediately. Stay inside. Lock the doors. Our team is already on the way." My heart dropped into my stomach. "What do you mean they know where we are? I thought you had everything locked down." "There's been a leak somewhere," the agent said, his voice clipped. "We don't know how, but they've got a bead on you. We need to move fast." I hung up, my hands shaking as I relayed the information to Ethan and Logan. Logan looked like he was going to be sick. "We have to go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The FBI's on their way to move us." But something didn't feel right. I couldn't shake this creeping sense of unease. The FBI had been so careful, so precise in everything they'd done to protect us. How had this group found us? And why now, after we'd been hidden away for days? Before I could even finish the thought, we heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching outside the house. We all froze, our eyes snapping toward the window. I could hear the distant rumble of engines, more than one, and my stomach twisted in fear. This wasn't the FBI. "Get down," Ethan shouted, pulling Logan and me behind the couch just as the sound of gunfire shattered the night. The windows exploded, shards of glass flying everywhere as bullets tore through the walls. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I thought it would burst. Logan was crouched beside me, his hands over his head, shaking uncontrollably. Ethan had grabbed a lamp and was using it to cover us, though it wouldn't do much against the barrage of gunfire. They'd found us, and they weren't waiting around. "Stay low," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the chaos. "We need to get out of here." The front door crashed open, and I could hear footsteps, heavy, purposeful, storming into the house. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way out. There was no time to wait for the FBI. We were on our own. Ethan motioned toward the back of the house, where the small kitchen led out to a rear exit. "We need to get to the back door," he said, his voice tight with fear. But just as we started to crawl toward the kitchen, the door to the living room flew open. I caught a glimpse of a figure, tall, muscular, and masked, standing in the doorway, a gun raised in his hand. "Don't move," he growled, his voice deep and menacing. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. My heart was pounding in my ears, and my mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this. There was no reasoning with these people. They weren't here to negotiate. I didn't think. I just reacted. In a split second, I grabbed the lamp that Ethan had been using for cover and hurled it at the man standing in the doorway. The glass shattered as it hit him, and he stumbled back, just long enough for us to make a break for the kitchen. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Logan by the arm and practically dragging him toward the back door. Ethan was right behind us, his face pale with terror. We crashed through the kitchen, my hands fumbling with the lock on the back door. My mind was racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins, but somehow, I managed to get the door open. We stumbled out into the night, the cold air hitting us like a slap in the face. There was no time to stop. The men were right behind us, their footsteps pounding on the floor inside the house. We sprinted through the backyard, our breaths ragged, the sounds of gunfire still ringing in my ears. I could hear the roar of engines in the distance, and I prayed. Hoped that it was the FBI. But we couldn't stop to find out. We had to keep moving. Logan was falling behind, his breaths coming in desperate gasps. I can't," he wheezed, doubling over. I turned back, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. "You have to keep going, Logan," I urged, my voice frantic. "We're almost there." But just as we reached the edge of the yard, the headlights of a car swung into view. My heart stopped. For a split second, I thought it was the FBI, but then I saw the masked man behind the wheel. They were everywhere. There was no escape. In that moment, time seemed to slow down again. I could hear the sound of footsteps closing in behind us, the rumble of the car engine growing louder. Logan was gasping for air, his body shaking with fear. Ethan was trying to pull him forward, but we all knew we couldn't outrun them. And then, out of nowhere, the deafening sound of sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flashed through the darkness, and the car in front of us screeched to a halt. More gunfire erupted, but this time, it wasn't aimed at us. It was aimed at the men chasing us. The FBI had arrived. The next few moments were a blur of flashing lights, shouting voices, and the terrifying sound of gunfire echoing in the night. I didn't know where to go, what to do. All I could do was grab Logan and Ethan and try to keep us all out of the line of fire. When the chaos finally died down, we were sitting in the back of an FBI vehicle, wrapped in blankets, staring blankly at the scene in front of us. The men who had come after us were either dead or in custody. The FBI agents moved quickly, securing the area, checking us for injuries. But the real damage wasn't physical. It was the trauma of everything we'd been through. Logan was silent, his eyes hollow, his hands still trembling. Ethan sat beside him, his face pale, but alive. We'd made it out, but only barely. The next few days were a whirlwind. The FBI continued their investigation, making more arrests and finally dismantling the criminal network that had targeted Logan. It turned out that the leak had come from someone inside the FBI itself, a corrupt agent working with the organization. They had been feeding information to the group, keeping them one step ahead of us the entire time. It made sense now. Why they had always seemed to know where we were. Why they had been able to find us no matter how well the FBI had hidden us. The agent had been caught, but the damage had already been done.